Forget the calendar. This is how I actually decide how often a horse needs a hoof trim. I'm going to go through 6 different things that do affect this, that can make it different for every horse. And then at the end, I'm going to show you what you can look for in your own horses. Of course, you can work with your own hoof care professional to evaluate your horse's needs and make informed decisions together. This is just to help give you a general education on how often horses need their hoof trims and different reasons they might need more or less time in between them. The first point I'm going to go over here is what is a standard trim cycle. Now, you've probably heard a wide variety of things depending on who you talk to. Usually 6 to 8 weeks is normal, but you will hear sometimes as often as 4 weeks or as little as 10 or even 12 weeks, depending on the situation and depending on the person whose opinion you're getting. The most important thing to consider that I think a lot of people don't think about is the breakover. Now, if you've watched my videos, you've heard me talk about breakover before, but I'm going to explain it really clearly and, of course, using my cadavers here. So breakover is the amount of time it takes the hoof to essentially break over in stride. So the longer the toe, the longer the breakover. Now, what I have not talked about before is that every 1 centimeter of extra toe length, so a very small amount, it's putting an extra 110 pounds of pressure on these tendons and ligaments inside the leg, especially the deep digital flexor tendon, which comes along the back of the leg, goes over the navicular bone, and inserts on the coffin bone. You can see how these tendons and ligaments are having to stretch a lot more during the stride. Now, this long toe, this long breakover is not only putting strain on the tendons and ligaments, but also on the lamina of the hoof. Here, you can see the lamina in this hoof has grown really long and stretched. I've talked about this hoof before. It was a horse that was not tamed and could not be trimmed, lived in a very rocky pasture. Did a decent self-trim, but definitely had a long hoof wall here. So that lamina, which is interconnected like this, the internal and external lamina, gets pulled apart. This is where you're going to get things like white line disease, a stretched toe, flares. These are all signs of a stretched lamina. So when you think about 1 centimeter of toe length creating 110 pounds of extra pressure, that's not something that's going to be super visible to the eye. By the time you're looking at the hoof and saying, wow, that toe looks really long, that could be an extra 1,000 pounds of pressure if it's an extra 10 centimeters longer than it should be. So throughout the whole rest of this video, just keep that in mind. I will probably circle back to it. But when you hear a standard trim cycle, there really is no standard trim cycle because horses grow at different speeds and they wear at different rates, which I'm going to get into later in this video. I'm actually going to get to that right now because number 2 that I have written down here is environment and movement. So where is the horse living? Is this horse living on a steep rocky hillside, or is the horse living in a soft green pasture, or somewhere in between, maybe on a track, or do they spend a lot of time in a padded stall, perhaps at night? These are all things to consider. So there's 2 aspects to this. The harder the ground the horse is on and the more the horse is moving, the more that hoof is going to be worn down naturally. But also, with more movement comes more blood flow and more stimulation, which also means more hoof growth. So it really depends. If you are maybe an endurance rider and your horse is out moving a lot, but you wear hoof boots, there's going to be a lot of movement, so a lot of extra blood flow, a lot of extra hoof growth, but not a lot of extra wear because the horse has boots on most of the time it's doing this movement. Or maybe are you working your horse in an arena and lot without boots? Maybe you're doing jumping or dressage. I want you to just think about with your horses, what ground are they on? How much are they moving naturally? And is the rate of growth going to be outdone by the weight of wear? So it is not uncommon, horses that maybe do a lot of trail rides completely barefoot, they are not going to need, oh my gosh, there's a raccoon on the deck. Where was I? I was startled to see the raccoon because I thought they would all be hibernating by now, but I guess they're not. So where was I at? Yes, growth, natural wear. Oh yes, this is what I was saying. It's not uncommon if you are out trail riding a lot without boots that you might not need to do a lot of huge hoof trims. If you're riding out on really rocky terrain, your horse is wearing down those feet really nice, you just might need to touch up the hoof every so often, maybe redo the bevel, make sure the hoof is staying balanced, but you are probably not going to be taking big nipper chunks out of your horse's hooves. It really depends on the horse though. Which also is going to bring me to number 3, diet. The more nutrients your horse is getting, the more that hoof is going to grow. Your horse might not have a, say, deficiency, but if there's not like quite enough vitamins or minerals, the body is going to feed those vital organs first, and then the coat and the hooves are second. So if you're really giving like a boosted extra amount of vitamins and minerals, it's definitely going to get to the hooves and probably cause faster growth. I have one client who feeds 3/4 of a cup flax seeds to all her horses, and we really started noticing that the hooves were growing faster after she started doing that. Now, that might not be the case with all horses, but I have noticed it sometimes, which kind of brings me to another example I want to give. I will sometimes go to a client's house. They have 2 horses. Those horses live in the same kind of ground. They do the same kind of work, and they get the same diet, but one will grow faster than the other. Horses, just like people, are unique, and there's no exact answer for each animal. There's no exact result you're going to get if you do the same thing. There is kind of always a situation by situation that you have to evaluate here. So that's just one thing I want to say. If you have multiple horses and you're finding this is the case, it's not because you're doing anything wrong or a horse is deficient in something. It just might be that that horse has hooves that grow slower. One more thing about the nutrients is that it won't just affect the rate of growth, but it will affect the quality of the growth. So the hoof coming in, if there is enough vitamins and minerals, is going to be much stronger and be less likely to chip and crack or crumble, which can, in a way, affect how often the horse needs their hooves trimmed. Not just because how fast they're growing. If they're chipping up really easily because it's a weak hoof wall, you're going to be wanting to have them trimmed more. And then one more thing about that, I just thought, if you start a new supplement, it's not affecting the hoof that's already grown out. It's going to start at the new growth up at the hairline, so right up here. And it usually takes about 8 months to a year to have the hoof wall grow all the way out from the top to the bottom. So if you start feeding a supplement and you do it for a month or even 2 or 3 months and you're not noticing a difference, it's not because it's not working. It's just because the hoof that you've been feeding has not grown out yet. Now, if you are interested in learning to know how often your horse needs their hoof trimmed and wanting to really pay more attention to your horse's hoof, which I would guess that you are if you've gotten this far in the video, you might be interested in a new mini course that I just came out with. It teaches you how to rasp and maintain a bevel in between professional hoof trims. So it also might make a longer time in between when you are needing to have a professional out while not doing it all yourself and feeling too overwhelmed. You're going to have the professional doing that main hoof trim for you and keeping everything going on the right track. And you're just going to be doing a nice bevel in between when they're coming out. And this mini course that I made teaches you everything how to do that exactly, step by step, breaks it down, everything you need, all the different tips and tricks for using your rasp. So it's nice and easy for you to do. It is really a very great first step into hoof trimming for horse owners. So if you're interested, you can check that out. I'll put a link in the description and in the comments of this video. Number 4 that I have written down here is seasonality. So this can be an effect. It's not, again, all the time, and it depends on what season you have. I live in Northern California, and what I find through the seasons that I experience is that the horses will grow a lot in spring and even a lot in the fall, but maybe slow down in the depths of winter. Now, this is not all horses, but it just is something that I noticed. I will sometimes go a week longer in the winter. Another thing that is affected by how often your horse needs a hoof trim is what the hoof is doing. Because when the sole sheds, it's going to pop out and leave a longer hoof wall. So I'll show you here, like there's this really long hoof wall here. If this sole was all filled in with retained sole that was ready to shed and it popped out, one day your horse might not really look like it needs a hoof trim. And then the next day when all that sole's popped out, or over the next 2 days, all of a sudden you're going to have a huge amount of hoof wall, 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch that you need to take down. It's not because the horse grew 1/2 inch of hoof wall overnight, it's because that sole all popped out. So I notice in the spring when the hooves are hardening up and it's not raining as much, this sole will come out in big chunks. And even in the summer this happens. Every horse is a little bit different. But in the late spring, early summer is usually when most horses do it. Their sole will pop out in big chunks, and it can be a little freaky. You're like, why are these huge chunks coming out of my horse's hooves? But it's all natural. part of the hoof's process. And as long as you're just using your hoof pick to get these chunks out and not, using sharp tools to pull it out, it is ready to shed, and there's a new hard callus sole underneath. Just like the hoof wall is always growing new, the sole is always growing new. It's just not in one line coming straight up like the hoof wall. It will build up new sole underneath and pop that old sole out. Now in the late fall and the winter, the soles will also usually shed again. And this is just in my experience in the horses I see. And when it's in this moister environment, it's gonna come out really chalky. Like you'll be able to take your hoof pick and just kind of scrape the sole, and it's coming up very chalky, almost powdery. And as you scrape away, you'll find usually a firmer and more yellow tinted sole underneath, and it's more like a very white powder that's coming off. This is also normal, and it can also look a little weird if you're not used to it. But again, it's just that old sole shedding off and the new sole that is now ready to be the live sole playing underneath. Another aspect of seasonality is if you take your horse to competitions and there's a certain season for it. Like some say the jumper season is spring through the summer and there's no competitions in the winter. You're going to want to keep your horses really on a much shorter cycle when they're competing at a high level, because of what I mentioned in the beginning, with even that extra centimeter of toe causing an extra 110 pounds of pressure. Think about the front hooves coming off a jump with just an even couple centimeter too long of a toe. That can really create a lot of extra strain, a higher chance of an injury. Barrel racing, the same thing. Now, of course, if you maybe have an indoor arena and you're working your horse really training hard for competition in the winter, the same thing goes, even if you're not doing an actual competition. But just thinking about the level your horse is riding at and what season they're in. If they're kind of taking a rest season, you can probably back off how often they're getting a trim because they're just out in the pasture. Not that you want to let them get super long, but just knowing that they're not doing that extremely high athletic intense work. Number 5 is gait cues, and this is a really great one because it's not necessarily directly looking at the hooves themselves, but it's getting in tune with your horse and paying attention to your horse's stride and seeing how your horse feels to you, really helping you just tune in together. So the biggest one here is if your horse is tripping or stumbling more, and this is the most noticeable one. I have had some clients that really noticed their horses were stumbling and tripping, and I came out to do a trim a little bit early, and even though the hooves didn't look seriously long, it was much improved after I gave them a trim. So not to say if your horse trips or stumbles one time, that means their hooves are too long and they need a trim, but if it's something you're noticing quite often as you get farther away from when they're trimmed, that would be a reason to shorten your trim cycle. Other slightly less noticeable ones are if the horse is dragging their hooves. This is something you want to pay attention to, and it also could be from, a back issue. There could be other reasons that a horse will drag their hooves. But again, if you're noticing it not right after the horse is trimmed, and then you're noticing it more towards the end of the trim cycle, you might even notice in dramatic cases where the hoof is kind of squared off, like the toe has gotten worn down from being dragged, and the sides are still round. That definitely means you're going to want to investigate why the horse is dragging their hooves, if it's doing it enough to really wear that toe down there. If you're riding or working with the horse on the ground and you just notice the horse a little bit of a shorter stride or feels a little bit choppy, this is something I've felt in my own horses. That could be a reason that they are needing a hoof trim more soon. Again, because if that breakover is too long for them and it's making them a little uncomfortable, they're not going to be wanting to stride out and reach as far, because they're going to want to try and keep it close, keep it tight up in there to relieve a little bit of that pressure. They're compensating in a way for their long toes. And again, horses are kind of a big mystery puzzle, because a horse could have a shorter stride because of an issue in the body or another pain somewhere, but this is just where you're going to have to put your detective cap on and really get in tune with your horse. Another one that also might not directly be from hoof trimming, it could be from something else, or it could be from hoof trimming, is if your horse is clipping, if they're bringing that back foot forward and hitting the back of the front foot. And again, I know people use bell boots for this, and definitely if you're in competition or doing something super athletic, you are going to want to put those bell boots on, because even a horse with, a perfect toe length can still clip itself doing certain maneuvers. But if it's seeming to happen a lot, like if you do use bell boots when you ride your horse and you're noticing they're getting turned, they're getting knocked off out of place more often because their horse is clipping a lot, that could mean that you're going too long in between your hoof trims. And the last one in the gait cues that I want to mention is a toe first landing. So when a horse walks, naturally should land heel first and then come down, and then do the breakover as the stride is made. But when there is pain or issues or that long toe and the horse is knowing it's going to put a lot of extra strain to that heel first landing, they might switch to a toe first landing to compensate. Now this can be dramatic and noticeable, or it can be very subtle. So you can take a video of your horse walking up close from the hooves and kind of just slide your finger on the bar on your phone and look at it in super slow motion. And that's the best way to tell if you're really having a hard time doing it walking, and it can be hard to see. I would want to put the horse on not a deep sand arena. It's going to be harder to see in that. And it's also, if you walk your horse out on a harder ground and videotape to see about the toe first landing. If it's on gravel and the horse isn't used to gravel, they might do a toe first landing and not be doing it other places. So just consider, hey, what is my horse used to? Is this generally a soft ground but it's flat? And if they're doing it, that might be because they are going too long in between trims. It could also be from thrush and the central sulcus. Again, issues in the body. So I wish I had more things that I could tell you, oh, this definitely means that, but there is always different reasons because they are very complicated creatures, and there's always more we can be learning about them. But just getting to recognize your own horse, again, you'll start to see, hey, I think that might be because this horse has gone too long in between a trim. Number 6 here is a pretty broad one. It is horse-specific reasons that you would go longer or shorter in between a trim cycle. So I'm going to break down more time examples and different reasons why you would want to go longer or shorter. So a big one is if the horse has an injury. Again, because of the breakover, if you've got any leg injuries that involve tendons or ligaments, you want to keep that horse on a short trim cycle. Or if your horse has navicular, ring bone, anything in the foot or lower leg like that, I would keep a shorter cycle, probably about 4 weeks. Of course, you're going to check and see how much your horse is growing. Some horses may grow more, some horses may go less. If we're in a laminitis situation, like a acute laminitis episode, I'm going to want to trim that horse every 2 weeks to really keep the pressure off that hoof wall and off that lamina. So those are examples where there is like a real serious issue and a reason that you want to keep those hooves trimmed really short. Other reasons you would want to go shorter but that aren't as, immediately noticeable or kind of scary like that is if your horse has flares, if your horse has a crack, whether it be in the toe or a quarter crack. You want to keep that toe really short to allow that crack to grow out without the excess pressure being on the hoof wall. Again, if there's any hoof issue that your hoof trimmer has talked to you about or that you've noticed in your horse's hooves, underrun heel is one where you really want to keep that toe back. Sometimes every 2 weeks, sometimes every 3 weeks, sometimes every 4 weeks. It depends on the severity and how fast the horse is growing and really how on top of it you need to stay. With all these issues, as you start to see some improvements and get a handle on it, usually back up, add a week longer in between. Don't add so long that you're going to regress in the treatment, but I do really recommend when you're treating injuries or hoof issues, anything like that, you stay on top of it first and be more on the aggressive side and be more on the overly cautious side. Even if the trims that are being done are very minimal, doing them more often will really make a huge difference in your success in healing from these hoof pathologies or injuries. Another horse-specific reason, which I have gone over a little bit earlier, but I'll give more specific examples in this one, is what are you doing with the horse? Are you just looking for a maintenance trim on a horse that is out to pasture and doesn't really do any work? Or is this a competition horse? Is this a performance trim that you're wanting to do? Generally, I say if you are riding your horse and doing stuff with your horse, I don't like to go longer than 6 weeks. Again, maybe it's a horse that happens to grow really slowly and then we can go longer, or if it's a horse that grows really quickly. 6 to 4 weeks is really what I like to do. I do my horses every 4 weeks. I just feel like it really keeps them looking the best and being the best. If your horse is just out to pasture, I would say you could go up to 8 weeks. If there's no issues, the horse is healthy, has healthy hooves, no injuries, and is not growing at an alarming rate, I think 8 weeks is okay for that. I really don't think it's good to go longer than 8 weeks in any circumstance unless, well, here's an example. Some donkeys that I trim just happen to grow really slow. They're not unhealthy, they're not being malnourished. They just happen to grow much slower, and I do them every 12 weeks and they're completely fine. But there are not many horses that I would recommend that for. And that's just because even if the horse is not doing a ton, if that hoof is getting too long, it's really putting a lot of excess strain. And then they're getting a trim and short, and then they're getting long, and getting a trim and short. And it's just kind of a big adjustment for them. Even though it might not seem like a lot, it's a little bit of a yo-yo effect on them, and it can then lead to a problem. The more often you let the hooves get too long, the more likely there's going to be an issue. If there's some kind of an emergency or whatever, life happens and your horse goes, 10, 11 weeks in between a trim, don't freak out. It's not the end of the world. But if it starts to happen on a regular basis, then it can lead to more issues being likely to pop up. I've had life circumstances come up where I did not trim my horse as often as I should have, and then I kind of had to deal with an underrun heel situation. And I was able to correct it, and I had to trim him every 2 weeks for a while and do that. But you want to avoid that if possible, right? You want to have to do less complicated things with your horse. You want to keep things just going nice and smooth and staying healthy. So I would say riding performance horses, 4 to 6 weeks, the more intense things that you're doing with them, I would keep it closer to the 4 weeks. Out to pasture, 6 to 8 weeks. You could do it sooner if you're feeling like your horse really needs it, based on all these things that we've talked about. Or again, if they live in a super rocky, if you've built a paddock paradise track and they're moving a lot and there's a lot of rocks in there and they're wearing down more, then it would be less. But I would say just generally for a horse out in a regular pasture, I wouldn't go longer than 8 weeks. And then again, for injuries, specific hoof issues, you're growing out, laminitis, navicular, anything like that, I would want to keep it 4 weeks or less. As a general rule, of course, always exceptions. One more aspect of this horse-specific reasons is conformation. And this kind of goes into the reasons I talked about before, but reasons why those things might be happening, such as flares. If your horse stands toe in or toe out, just because of the horse's conformation, the horse is going to flare more easily. So you're going to want to keep that shorter cycle on there. Some horses that are a little bit more upright in their conformation with their pasterns and have that more upright hoof, they can usually get away with going a little longer because they're just kind of, the hoof is growing up taller rather than longer like that, and the heel is getting sucked under and the toe coming forward. Not that you necessarily should, but just generally you can get away with it. What are some other examples I wrote down? And then along with that, horses with a lower heel, naturally you're going to want to trim more often. So you can look at your horse and say, hey, does my horse have a high heel? Does my horse have a low heel? Is my horse standing straight? These are all clues onto how often you might need your horse to be trimmed. And then this is not necessarily conformation related, but it is body related. Horses with metabolic issues, Cushing's, equine metabolic syndrome, insulin resistance. These horses are going to be more likely to things like white line disease because of sugars that they can't handle in their diet, getting little laminitis flare-ups, not like a laminitis episode. It can be called preclinical laminitis, but that is a confusing term because preclinical means there's no symptoms, and they are symptoms. They're just not symptoms that are fully classified as laminitis. It's like very, very, very mild pre-laminitis symptoms, such as those event rings in your horse hooves, a little bit of flare, a little bit of stretched toe, where your horse is maybe never lame from it, but just because of metabolic issues, those hooves are getting affected by the diet. And in that case, you really want to work on the diet, yes, but also generally have a shorter trim cycle to keep that pressure off that lamina, the internal and external lamina. Now, to check for this at home, you want to consider, all the factors we've talked about in this video, but specific things to look for that are definite signs your horse needs a trim. Is the hoof getting chipped up? There's a sign. There's a long hoof wall. You can look underneath your horse's hoof. Sometimes you might see hoof wall height coming up, like you see in this horse, or you just might see that the hoof wall is long at the toe. So I do notice in a lot of horses that I trim, the hoof wall doesn't necessarily get super long and upright. That gets worn down by the horse walking, but then the hoof wall has grown out as well. And because the horse is not, moving how they would in the wild in the way that just makes them trim a perfect natural hoof bevel on there. So that brings me to the main point that how to tell if your horse needs a trim or not, which is, has the bevel disappeared? If you're working with a barefoot trimmer, they are probably putting a bevel on your horse's hoof, which I highly, highly recommend. If your horse is barefoot, you gotta have a bevel on there. It's like the natural Mustang roll, it's called, but it's just that nice roll all along that hoof wall. And you'll notice that will grow out, and the hoof will become completely flush with the ground when you look at it. You won't see that nice roll on there. And that is a sign, maybe your horse doesn't need a full hoof trim, but you definitely need a new bevel put on that horse. So if you are interested in learning about that and just kind of learning to touch up your horse's hooves in between trims, check out my mini course. It's got so much great info in there. And it's just a great way to become a more confident and independent horse owner. Other things you can look for is that if you are working on certain issues with your horse's hooves and you're noticing, hey, it feels like it's coming back a little bit. There was that toe crack that we really were working on. It was almost gone, and now it seems like it's gotten a little longer again. I would want to shorten up that trim cycle. Hey, my horse is ready for a trim. Are my hoof boots getting too tight? These are all signs that you can look for to see if your horse is needing a trim more often. And the more you learn to recognize it with your own horse or horses, you will start to know them each better, and you'll be more certain of yourself and just know, oh, hey, that horse needs a trim. That's not looking right. I can tell. So this is really a great exercise to get to know your horse better and be more in tune with your horse's health. If you are having someone come out to trim your horses and you're having them come more often, or you are, maintaining your horse's bevel in between professional trims, and you're noticing you're not needing to do as much each time, you could try going a week longer, and then if you go, oh wow, I'm having to do a lot this time, okay, that means you went a little bit too long, but you will learn, especially if you're rasping the bevel yourself just a little bit, you'll start to recognize, okay, wow, I just need to do a little bit here, or that was kind of a big job, maybe I should do it a week sooner next time. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you learned something. Let me know in the comments what was the most helpful to you, or if you have any other hoof care related questions that I can make a fireside chat about.